Tonight at 10, the Prime Minister fights on as her future hangs in the balance, and the Chancellor warns the Cabinet spending cuts are coming. As ministers are told to find savings in their departments, even the pledge to ensure pensions rise in line with inflation is now in question. We'll have the latest from our political editor, also on the programme tonight. The family's raising fresh concerns over maternity care at a hospital trust despite an independent inquiry into what went wrong over a decade. Somalia's drought, the worst for 40 years, the UN warns of the threat to children's lives. It started as the British Broadcasting Company with just 4 employees. Today, the BBC is 100 years old. And celebrating the best of British and Irish music, we reveal the winner of the prestigious Mercury Prize.
On BBC London, a special report on record levels of microplastics in the Thames and a second day of disruption as protesters block the Dartford crossing.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has spent the day battling to regain her authority amid unrest within her party. Liz Truss held a cabinet meeting this morning during which the Chancellor made it clear that ministers must find savings within their departments. A Downing Street spokesperson signalled that even the pledge to keep pensions rising in line with prices next year, the so-called triple lock, may not be retained. Tonight, the International Monetary Fund, which had been so critical of Liz Truss's mini-budget, welcomed the reversal of the tax cuts, saying it signalled commitment to fiscal discipline. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth reports.
Is she finished now?
As ministers met this morning, the questions continued.
Is it time for a new leader?
Uncertainty about the political and economic choices that are centred here in Westminster, but will echo around the country. This part of the Cotswolds is typical Conservative turf. Liz Truss came here to make her pitch to party members over the summer. So now she's had to ditch much of what she offered and apologise. Where does that leave the party members who just months ago made her Prime Minister?
I voted for Liz Truss, but I regret it. The values that I hold don't seem to be the values that some modern Conservatives are holding. And I just don't understand some of the decisions that have been made. They are not Conservative decisions.
I've been a member for years, and this is the first time I'm totally questioning it. And it's because we're not uniting. I think we're more backstabbing and we're destroying our own party from the inside. We have a Prime Minister, we should be supporting her.
In Westminster, efforts are underway to shore up support. The Cabinet told today spending cuts are coming in the quest for economic credibility, with almost everything on the table, even potentially pensions. That could mean more unpopular decisions. And in here, there's already deep unrest, though Conservative MPs don't agree on the path or the person they should now follow. For some, the economic choices the Prime Minister makes with her new Chancellor could be key.
If the two of them work together and are a success, and I'm going to do everything I can to try and make sure that that is the case, then I think she will lead us into the next election. If it's not a success and if it doesn't work, then the Conservative Parliamentary Party will have to think again.
Labour say any further shift should be the choice of the country, not the Conservative Party.
Many people now feel that the real risk now is carrying on with this lot rather than actually having a general election, bringing in a Labour government and securing our economy. That's the first thing that absolutely needs to be done.
Back in the Cotswolds, these are the Conservatives who'll be knocking on doors. With warnings of difficult decisions on tax and spending to come, there's little consensus about the right path or the Prime Minister.
She persuaded me. I thought she was very strong. She seemed to come across very well. So I voted for Liz in the end, but she really has become quite a weak personality. Yeah, I'm afraid that I feel that she should go.
I didn't vote for Liz, but I voted for Rishi. But I have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who I respect, the democratic decision, and I want to give it time to see whether the changes in the policies will actually bear fruit.
The needs of the country come before the needs of our party. We are a patriotic party, and we need somebody in place immediately. So I don't think that there is simply the time to have a leadership contest.
These conversations are taking place at every level of the Conservative Party, right across the country, and that is where the consequences of the choices made in Westminster will be felt too. Alex Forsyth, BBC News in the Cotswolds.
Our political editor, Chris Mason, is with me now. So it certainly appears to have been a calmer day today as the Prime Minister tries to bolster support. How have you read the mood?
It has been quieter today, but then we are comparing it with yesterday, which was like a kind of heavy metal concert in political terms, in terms of the noise. There's been a lot, though, going on in private. So tonight, Conservative MPs have been into Downing Street to see Liz Truss to try and be reassured by what she has to say. A couple of other things worth mentioning. In the last couple of days, Sir Graham Brady, the senior Conservative backbencher, who's basically in charge of working out whether a Prime Minister has the confidence of the party, has not only seen the Prime Minister, but also today the Chancellor. Now, that is described as routine, and yes, these meetings do happen routinely, but routine left the building a long time ago and hasn't been seen since. So I think we have to see it in that context. Then there is the next set of rows bubbling. They are all about spending cuts and where they happen. Just one example is this idea that perhaps pensions won't increase in line with prices. Even the prospect of that is unnerving some Conservative MPs, and there's plenty more examples where that came from in the coming weeks. And then these ongoing conversations about who might replace Liz Truss were she to go. One backbencher saying to me, Rishi should put up or shut up. That a reference to the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. The thing is, he was seen, fairly or unfairly, to be the guy who helped bring down the last Prime Minister. So the idea he would want to be seen to be bringing down this one as well seems unlikely. Then there's Penny Mordaunt and there's Ben Wallace there, both in the Cabinet. So how do they deal with all of this? Bodging together an answer to the question who comes next is very live amongst Tory MPs, but very difficult to pull off. Talking of very difficult, Prime Minister in front of Prime Minister's questions tomorrow, which I suspect could be humiliating for her.
Chris Mason, thank you. Well, while the upheaval continues to swirl around Westminster, millions of people around the country are having to grapple with the rising costs of daily life. Today, energy experts predicted that from April, typical household energy bills could reach more than £4,000 a year, just when the government plans to scale back support, though it says the most vulnerable will continue to be protected. A survey of more than 4,000 people carried out for the BBC found that most people are already delaying putting on the heating, and more than half expect their financial position to worsen in the next 6 months, up from 30% in January. Our business editor Simon Jack has been talking to people in Hastings about their concerns.
It doesn't feel like living. Can't do anything now. It's all above my price range.
I should be going out having fun, living my life, but I'm sat at home writing a bills list as soon as I get paid.
The cost of living crisis spans the generations. Here in Hastings, this charity is busy distributing free food packages across town. Demand is high and the need goes wider in the community than volunteers here have ever seen before.
It is a real struggle for everyone. Just because you're looking comfortable doesn't mean you're comfortable. When we feed all of these great people, we give them a bit of light at the end of the tunnel that they can go and put their money on gas or electricity or anything they can try and hit that's differently from the stress of feeding their family.
Charities and families are pulling together to keep bills down. A mile down the road, Pauline Marsh gets batches of meals cooked by her daughter and delivered, reducing her food bill and her energy bill, and she watches her prepayment meter anxiously.
Every single morning at a set time, I write down what's left on it to see how much I've used.
So you're watching it all the time. It's a constant worry.
All the time.
She makes a flask of tea for the day so the kettle isn't on so often, and like 90% of people surveyed by the BBC, she's delaying the central heating coming on this year.
I will not be putting my heating on until I'm absolutely freezing. I just won't do it. It's existing. That's what it is now. You can't socialise anymore. You can't meet friends and go out for a meal. You can't dress up. You know, I go to charity shops, I get clothes from other people. It's just not the same world anymore.
And there's more uncertainty for pensioners as ministers refuse to guarantee pensions will rise in line with inflation as previously promised. Clearly people on low and fixed incomes like pensions are the hardest hit by this crisis. And remember, energy bills, despite government support, will be twice as expensive going into this winter as they were into the last. But even people with decent paying jobs are seeing the cost of living accelerate faster than their wages, making them a bit poorer every day. It's the biggest cost of living squeeze since the 1950s. And for millions of people, there is too much month left at the end of the money. This insurance company is one of the biggest employers in the area. It's put up wages by 5%, made a £500 winter payment, established a hardship fund and is laying on free food in the office, a recognition that many in work are struggling too.
We felt this was the right and responsible thing for us to do as an employer for our colleagues for this winter, and enduring, because we don't know how long the inflation environment will last.
3 young employees told me about the pressures and sacrifices they're having to make. From paying the rent.
Our rent's gone up £100 per person per month, and we were sharing, so it's an extra £400 that we're trying to find somewhere.
To buying a house.
Now we've got a bit more of a deposit, the house is an interest rate, there's no point buying now because you'd just be spending loads more money.
To going out with friends.
Having dinner and drinking with friends, not able to do that as often anymore unless it's celebrating a special occasion, just because having to save that money to put towards more important things.
And the picture is getting worse. Since the BBC survey was conducted, the government has backtracked on energy support for all after this winter, and rising mortgage rates jumped further since its mini-budget spooked lenders. And don't forget, businesses, the same energy, food and other rises hitting their customers' pockets is putting up their costs. It's an economic battle in which there are very few winners. Simon Jack, BBC News, Hastings.
And you can hear more from Simon Jack with energy-saving tips on the Jeremy Vine Show on Radio 2 from midday tomorrow. We'll be in Sunderland all day tomorrow, finding out how the rise in the cost of living is affecting you. That's a special day of coverage on BBC Radio, television and online. The cost of living, tackling it together. Maternity care in the East Kent Hospital's NHS Trust remains fraught with problems despite an independent inquiry into the scandal. A report into the care provided at the Trust to women and babies between 2009 and 2020 will be published tomorrow. It's expected to be damning. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan first reported on the concerns in East Kent more than 2.5 years ago and has followed the story of many families who have been affected ever since.
Yes. Jamie Goddard is a healthy, thriving month-old baby. His parents, Stacey and Steve, are naturally delighted as well as extremely thankful because Jamie nearly died. Last month, Stacey went to the Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother Hospital in Margate. What greeted her was a crowded, short-staffed unit. After a long labour, Stacey knew the baby was imminent.
I said to her, you know, I know my body, it's my 4th baby.
But the midwife caring for her went on a break. Jamie was therefore delivered by an inexperienced, poorly supervised student midwife.
He had the cord wrapped around his neck. She didn't even see that. She straight away, naturally, just sort of picked him up and went to put him straight onto my chest, which obviously really constricted his windpipe.
Jamie was whisked away by another midwife, and for half an hour, Stacey, who lost her previous child at 22 weeks, didn't know if he was alive or dead.
I am very, very lucky he's alive, and I know what it's like to walk out of that hospital without a baby, and I thought that was going to happen again.
The family say the student midwife should never have been in that position, but the evidence we've seen suggests it's not a rare occurrence. A UK-wide survey of trainee doctors in maternity care paints a damning picture of the trust, particularly another hospital it runs, the William Harvey. In comparison to the UK average, trainees at the hospital say they were far more likely to be forced to deal with problems beyond their abilities, worn out at the end of their shift, and supervised by people they thought were incompetent. This maternity expert says a lack of staff is hampering care, but that hospitals across the country could do more with the people they have.
Failure to escalate concerns, failure to manage things when things go wrong, those are things that could actually be improved with the right training, and we're not seeing that on the front line.
Tomorrow's report will look at maternity problems of the Trust between 2009 and 2020. More than 200 families have spoken to the inquiry team, but despite the focus that brought, mistakes kept happening.
Put your arms up a little bit. You got to hold in.
6 months after the review was set up, Abel Barker was born, but his twin brother Otis never made it.
Is that your baby brother?
His mother Sarah had called the QEQM hospital in Margate just 3 days before she was due to have a caesarean section.
I phoned to say that he'd had unusual movements, increased movements, and then a sudden stop in movement. There was just lots and lots, and then nothing.
But a midwife told her it wasn't necessary for her to come in for a checkup, and by the time she went in, Otis had died. The hospital later admitted breaching its own guidelines, saying she should have been examined.
There's an identical little boy who's growing up alongside us and his siblings, and he is here and his brother isn't, and that's not fair. That isn't fair. I'm sorry.
In a statement, the Trust said they apologised unreservedly to every family that failed and were working hard to make improvements. The pace of these changes, however, is far too slow for those who feel the Trust let them down in recent times. Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Kent.
The UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, says Somalia could suffer rates of infant death unseen for half a century as warnings of a looming famine intensify. The number of people now being affected by the worst drought in 40 years has more than doubled, but less than half the money needed to help them has been raised. Climate change and conflict have contributed to severe food shortages across the Horn of Africa. And this map here uses data from a US aid group monitoring famine, and the area, the dark red area down there, is where a full-blown famine is projected within weeks. That means households with no food, children suffering acute malnutrition, and people dying every day from starvation. Our Africa correspondent Andrew Harding has been covering the crisis unfolding in Somalia for weeks, and tonight he reports from the border town of Dolo, where people walk for days to come in search of life-saving help.
We're heading out into Somalia's drought-lands, with an armed escort on lookout for Islamist militants. But all we encounter are dying villages. A solitary camel, too weak to stand, marks the entrance to a place called Kahare. A 56-year-old farmer, Ibrahim Shido, takes us to see what's become of his goats. The last of his herd, now dead from hunger. Did you ever imagine your life would end up like this? Never, he says, but when there's no rain, there's no future for this kind of life, and it's not just the animals that are dying. Which is why most villages are emptying fast. Small convoys like this one setting off in search of food and water. After a long trek, these families have reached the outskirts of a border town called Dolo.
9 days, they have been walking for the last 9 days.
The local authorities have organised tea for the new arrivals. And someone else registers them on a list that's growing by the hour. You get a good idea here of how quickly this crisis is starting to accelerate, with 300 or even 400 people now arriving at this one small camp every day now, and the international aid effort lagging far behind.
There's been a lot of lethargy, actually. Help hasn't been coming. I guess the international community is also looking at other areas where, you know, there's a lot of other things going on in the world as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They've been distracted with a lot of other things going on everywhere.
Some aid is reaching some parts of Somalia. So you all have these telephones, these mobile phones now. These women are getting cash from the United Nations sent directly to their phones. A handy system in a country where a long-running conflict makes humanitarian access so difficult. But it's not enough. Right now, the world is providing less than half of what's needed to save hundreds of thousands of lives.
I mean, I think we're in a completely unprecedented situation here. So we describe the situation here as completely historic in terms of the combination of climatic and conflict effects in the context of something which is so severe, so protracted. This just needs a significantly different level of response.
That means a massive push now to save Somalia from another famine and a much longer struggle to help it cope with the accelerating ravages of climate change. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Dolo, Somalia.
Ukraine's President Zelensky says 30% of the country's power stations have been destroyed by Russian attacks. Russia has stepped up strikes on electricity infrastructure with drones and cruise missiles in cities away from the front lines, causing blackouts across the country. President Zelensky says there is no longer any space for negotiations with the Kremlin. An Iranian athlete who competed in a climbing event in South Korea without her hijab says it dropped off by mistake. Some saw the move as a gesture of solidarity with the recent protests against the compulsory hijab laws in Iran. A post on Elnaz Rekabi's Instagram account says it was unintentional and that she is on her way back to Iran with the rest of the team. The government has called on China to explain the behaviour of its staff at the Chinese consulate in Manchester during a protest on Sunday, saying it was extremely concerned at the apparent scenes of violence. A Hong Kong pro-democracy protester was beaten up in the grounds of the consulate. One MP has claimed in Parliament that one of China's most senior diplomats in the UK got involved. More rail strikes have been announced next month by the RMT union in the ongoing dispute over jobs, pay and working conditions. Members at Network Rail will walk out on November the 3rd, 5th and 7th. It's thought only 20% of services are likely to run, causing a week's worth of disruption. The RMT's General Secretary Mick Lynch accused Network Rail of dishonesty in negotiations. British Gymnastics says it will now name any coach who's been banned from the sport as part of a zero-tolerance approach on abuse. It comes after a report earlier this year found issues of physical and emotional abuse against athletes. British Gymnastics says gymnasts' welfare would be prioritised over winning medals. Our sports correspondent Laura Scott reports.
4 months on from a damning review that found systemic abuse within British Gymnastics, a promise of widespread reform from the woman in charge, with success measured more on memories than medals and membership figures.
This is about acting on that abuse, making sure that there is no physical, mental or emotional abuse. If it's not fun and enjoyable and you're not having a positive experience, then raise questions. Everybody within gymnastics has to take that responsibility to really see the reforms that we're committed to, and I am committed to.
British Gymnastics has nearly doubled the size of its safeguarding team, hoping to get a grip on the backlog of hundreds of cases that are still to be processed. It has today published a 40-point action plan for delivery by 2025, which includes mandatory coach development to prevent a recycling of poor practices, the formation of gymnast, coach and club advisory groups to address accusations British Gymnastics was an insular organisation, and an improved complaints management system. The governing body is also closing a loophole to mean more roles, including choreographers, physios and masseurs, will come under its jurisdiction. And from now on, any coach who is banned will be listed on its website.
They will not have BG membership and they will not be able to coach within British Gymnastics. This is also part of a wider sports sector reform where we need to have a coaches register.
That would stop coaches who are banned in gymnastics from going on to coach in tennis, for example.
That's exactly it. This has to be a sports sector-wide commitment.
38 gymnasts have brought legal action against British Gymnastics for the abuse they say they suffered in the sport, but only one has seen their case settled so far. Those involved say the process is taking a serious toll.
For many of the gymnasts, the delays is causing unnecessary ongoing anxiety and mental health issues. And we would really call on British Gymnastics to make sure they speed up the processing of these claims.
British Gymnastics is adamant this is not just a box-ticking exercise and there is a genuine desire to implement a zero-tolerance approach to abuse, but it knows there will be no quick fix to a scandal of this scale. Laura Scott, BBC News, Lilleshall.
The BBC is 100 years old today. It started in 1922 as the British Broadcasting Company with just 4 employees and a promise that there would be no news broadcasts before 7 p.m. A lot has changed since then. Our media editor Amal Rajan reports.
2LO, Marconi House, London, calling.
A century ago, this country did a curious thing. It set up a company that would use wireless communication to engage the public. And so the BBC was born.
Put the statement in to get everything off you.
Over that century, it has faced few bigger tests than the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Do we have to go?
Yeah.
We can go, Chris.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Yep.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
BBC is interrupting normal programmes.
For 100 years now, the BBC has been a mirror to the nation, from the announcement of war.
This country is at war with Germany.
Later on in the day,
reflecting every aspect of our lives.
with some, oh dear, these...
From sporting glory.
It's all over. It is now. It's war.
To the birth of local radio.
We've had the Postmaster General to open the station, the Lord Mayor of Leicester's.
After hours of shooting and facing a line of troops, the crowd is still here.
And the unfolding of world history.
I'm going to give you a damn good thrashing.
The corporation has created countless smaller cultural institutions, from shows across genres such as comedy, and programmes in drama,
there is more
to national treasures.
Meaning and mutual understanding in exchanging a glance.
Along the way, the BBC has made a habit of annoying prime ministers.
Thank you for what the BBC, if they're true to their usual form, will tonight describe as a hostile reception.
And been through some appalling scandals. Throughout its century, technological innovation has powered the BBC. From the birth of collective eavesdropping, known as radio, to Alexandra Palace here in North London, where the first public television transmissions were made, new technologies allowed the BBC to reach ever bigger audiences and secure its emotional contract with the people. But today's new technologies, the internet, smartphones, social media, have weakened the BBC's grip on our culture and, together with political pressure, threaten its future. In an age of superabundant choice, there is a generational divide in consumption of BBC shows. Older people remain deeply attached and, mostly, willing to pay. Young people, less so.
Now we'll bid you good night, and the next tonight will be tomorrow night. Good night.
Britain has changed almost beyond recognition over a century, and so has the BBC.
This is the BBC television service.
To remain relevant, vital and loved, it needs to use the latest technology to secure a new contract with the people and persuade them that it is worth paying for.
The nations and the regions. For the news where you are. Goodbye.
Amal Rajan, BBC News.
I'm still here, and we do have more news for you because the winner of the prestigious Mercury Prize, which recognises the best of UK and Irish music, has been announced. This year, the award goes to Little Simz.
Miss Tanzania, she a do or die. Says she wanna know more about
The 28-year-old's album Sometimes I Might Be an Introvert was released last year. She's already had a Mercury nomination and has already won an Ivor Novello. Our arts correspondent Lisa Mazimba is at the Hammersmith Apollo with the winner, I think.
Yes, thank you. Now, one review called this album creative, clever and cool, with distinctive and intense vocals. And the woman behind it is here, straight off stage, Little Simz. You've been nominated before, you've won this time. Yeah. How does that feel?
It's crazy. It's so, I don't know, man. I just try to take everything in my stride and just, timing is everything. And, we're here. I'm very, very grateful. This is incredible. And I feel really good. I feel really blessed and calm.
Lots of big themes in this album, including referencing family. How important was it for you to do that?
Family is everything to me, Today I have my family right there, centre. Just regardless of what would have happened, I think just to have their energy around me, I think is important to me anyway. So I'm always, excited to spend time with them and be around them, and also, talk about them in my music because they're a big part of my story and a big reason as to why I'm here doing what I'm doing.
And also very briefly, things like community, being a woman in the 21st century?
Yeah, for sure. And it's, you know, it's trying times. Everyone's trying their best, you know what I mean? I just pray I can do what I can and contribute what I can to the landscape of music and society in whatever way, shape or form, and just try, you know, speak for those that don't have a voice and use my platform and my gift for the greater good.
Little Simz, congratulations on winning the Mercury Prize. On this 30th anniversary year, she joins a list of previous winners, including Arctic Monkeys, Suede, Pulp, Arlo Parks, Wolf Alice and so many others.
Yeah, man.
Lizo, thank you very much. Time now for a look at the weather. Chris Fawkes is with us. Chris.
Hi, Sophie. Well, the early morning mist and fog patches cleared to give some beautiful sunshine, but we had big differences in temperatures from north to south across the country. In parts of Sussex, we had temperatures reach as high as 20 degrees Celsius. Well, that's around 5 degrees above the seasonal average for the time of year. In Shetland, we also had sunshine, but here is a lot cooler, just 10 degrees. And it wasn't just cooler because it's further north. Actually, we had a much cooler air mass across Scotland with this area of high pressure. Now, over the next few days, that is going to rotate eastwards, really trapping this area of low pressure, and it's this low that then dominates, pushing bands of rain in across the UK from the southwest. So we are looking at quite a wet spell of weather. We're starting to see outbreaks of rain arrive at the moment from the southwest, the breeze picking up and very mild as well. Temperatures by the end of the night in Plymouth, 16 degrees Celsius, about 8 in Scotland, with a few mist and fog patches here. Tomorrow then, a much windier kind of day, with some rain at times across parts of England, Wales, Northern Ireland. I think probably northeast England and Scotland should probably stay mainly dry, but quite a bit of cloud here, a few sunny spells. Temperatures a little bit below average across the north, but still very mild for England and Wales, with temperatures about 15 to 19 degrees Celsius. On into Thursday's weather forecast, we get a more potent weather front, bringing a band of fairly heavy rain northwards and eastwards across the country. That rain will tend to ease later in the day. We'll see something of a clearance with some sunshine coming through later on, but there could be a few more showers following that. Temperatures still mild in England and Wales, starting to rise in Northern Ireland, but still a little on the cool side in parts of Scotland. That area of low pressure, though, really is stuck close to the UK. So we are going to see a further mixture of rain and showers, not just through Friday, through the weekend, and I'm afraid into next week as well. Sophie.
Chris, thank you. And that's it from the BBC News at 10 on the BBC's 100th birthday. There is more analysis of the day's main stories over on Newsnight with Kirsty Walk. That is just about to get underway on BBC Two. The news, though, continues here on BBC One. It's time now to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. From all of us here, good night.